Thank you so much, Julie. It's a delight to be here in this world where we are so connected and also 3 inches tall, all of us in our various Zoom screens. So, Bruchim Habayim, welcome everybody. This is going to be a 4-part series on Jewish perspectives on illness and healing, and I'll confess that the idea of doing it in just 4 1-hour sessions is kind of funny. This is a whole seminary course. It's a whole series of seminary courses. And the truth is, a lot of us, in fact, all of us, I would contend, know a lot about this subject because we're people and we have bodies and we are people who get sick. And we know people who get sick, and we live in an era of COVID. So this work that we're going to do, this learning, I'm hoping will resonate with some of your native instincts and will be timely and supportive. So you've heard a bit about me. I'm going to suggest some things about all of us, whether you're in Mauritius or Kuwait or New Jersey or Canada, no matter what. We are living through unprecedented times, and these times are having impacts on us. They have primary impacts if you are, heaven forbid, sick, or you know someone who has been sick, or God forbid, died. If your usual way of life has been upended, if you've been affected by someone else who's been affected, that's a secondary impact. We are all stewing in it in one way or another. We also bring to this the full diversity of our life experience, our instincts. Some of us are mystics, some of us are rationalists, some of us are trying to figure it out. Some of us feel like we've got it figured out, and it turned out we didn't have it figured out. Maybe we've had an illness and it taught us something really important. Maybe we don't want to think about this. I figure that if you're here, you don't fall in that latter category, that there's something about this subject and the connection between illness and healing on the one hand and Jewish on the other that really calls to us. And I'm glad that it does, because it really is very much a spiritual equalizer, this journey of illness and healing. It is something that we all experience. As they say in French, nobody gets out alive. And we can understand this as something that is depressive or depressing or sad, or we can understand it as a spiritual marinade, softening the heart, softening our spirit, finding blessing amidst all of this, refracting that one light into all these various colors of views and perspectives and how-tos and things that we do with it. So I'm going to bring us more like a spiritual MC than a front-loaded educator, hoping that we'll have time for questions, comments. I will do my very best to watch the chat box as well as I watch faces. It has been really wonderful learning with folks from all over the place, but there are more than 100 of us in the room now. So if I don't catch a hand, please don't be offended. I just can't see you. Pop something in the chat box. The first time that we see healing in Torah is from this week's Torah portion. This week. So our timing is just right. This is the song of the sea. Our ancestors made it through the waters parted. We saw the Cecil B. DeMille movie. Every so often, Bernie Sanders shows up right in the middle of the water. And the first thing that happened on the far end is this. They came toward Mara, literally bitter. And they couldn't drink from those waters there, for they were bitter. Beautifully ambiguous what they refers to, the waters or the people. So its name was called Mara because Mara means bitter. And the people, Yalinu, they murmured against Moses. They kvetched. And they said, what will we drink? And Moses cried out to God, and God showed him a tree. And Moses threw the tree into the waters sweetened, and Moses told them how it's going to be. And the next thing that happened is exactly this. Moses says on God's behalf, if you diligently listen to the voice of Adonai your God, and you do what's right in God's sight, and you give ear to God's mitzvot, God's connecting commands, and you keep all of God's statutes, then I will not put on you any of the diseases that I put on the Egyptians, for I, Yud-He-Vav-He, am your healer. Ki ani Adonai Rofecha. Take that in. This is 38 seconds after the crossing of the sea. Pharaoh's folks are left on the other side. We're free. Hallelujah. I need water to drink. And then boom, something about healing. Not love your neighbor as yourself, not the 10 Commandments, not be kind to the animals. I am Adonai, your healer. This is God's calling card, essentially. The first one came when Moses asked God at the burning bush, you're sending me back there. They're going to ask me, who are you? Who sent me back to them? They're going to ask me your name. What is it? And God said, terrible mistranslation, I am that I am. I will be what I will be. Don't pin me down. I am becomingness itself. So that was first. This is second. That the definition of God is the power of healing. God as healer is how God made God's self known to the Israelites, the first thing on the other side of the waters, the first moment of our freedom. So this is hard-baked into Judaism, hard-baked into our relationship with divinity. And instantly it creates a whole bunch of questions. And we've been wrestling those questions for thousands of years. Here are some. So if God is the healer, is God our only healer? What does that mean for medicine? A lot of people back in the day said, think some who really are not given to physical medicine because they believe in the power of faith. Is that what this means? Judaism actually says, no, you get the best medicine you can. And the halachic reason is that we are to live by the commandments and not die by them. We are to live. We are to seek the best healing we can. So God is your healer, but you should all go to your doctor. It's fascinating. What's the relationship between God and the doctor? Is God working through the doctor? Remember, this is the first thing we learn on the way out of Egypt. The first thing. So that's about God. Now, how about us? Who are we? Well, we're not the Egyptians. Great. If we follow the commandments, we're not the Egyptians. Uh-oh, that's a problem. Does that mean that we really are what we do? Does that mean that being Jewish is about doing Jewish? I put Bernie in the bottom because, I wonder, I'm willing to bet, that if you're like me, you're going to start to feel like you want to cross your arms a little bit and go harumph, because there are some uh-ohs here. Why us? Why the Jews? Why the Israelites? Are we special? Do we get special healing? Do we not get COVID? Uh-oh. And what is it about this conditionality? If you follow the commandments and you eat your vegetables and you do your homework, then I won't put on you the diseases from Exodus 15. Uh-oh. And do you want to pray to a God that would put on us? Our theology's instantly on the table. And does that mean in turn that if somebody gets sick, that they didn't follow the mitzvot? They didn't follow the commandments? A little bit of victim blaming? Ooh, that's rough. But what if you did? What if you washed your hands and wore your mask and you still got COVID? Does that mean that God's promise wasn't kept? We call this theodicy. This is the journey by which how can God be all-knowing, all-powerful, completely just when bad things happen to good people? And straight out of the box, the brain, the mind, the heart go, ugh. Don't we want a God that'll just comfort us and heal us? Straight out of the box, we are confronted with these issues. And they're not tangential. They are the first thing we confront. A question in the chat box privately: why didn't God warn us that cousins having kids lead to genetic diseases? One way to understand some of the materials in Leviticus 18 is exactly about that. About who we are to have intimate relations with. But that's still not necessarily a great answer, because bad things do happen to good people. The kids aren't to blame. We are automatically confronted. So what does this mean? Our ancestors wrestled this. They wrestled it hard, just like we do. Why do people get sick? Why did this happen to me? I don't deserve this. I've had enough. Choose someone else. Yeah. So Rashi, from the 11th century, one of our great expositors of Torah, said that it's pshuto, its plain meaning is this: the way that I, God, heal you is by teaching you the way to live, by teaching you Torah and mitzvot so that you can be saved from diseases. It's no different than a doctor. This is Rashi writing in the 11th century. Like a doctor who says, don't eat this thing because it can expose you to this disease. So if you live in a way that is honorable and right and just and in relationship with the mitzvot, it was imagined that therefore you won't get sick. Anybody know really pious people who get sick? Anyone know a bunch of shmoo bears that don't get sick? Our ancestors wrestled this. Okay, the Da'at Kenim, the next generation after Rashi, called the Tosfot, also out of medieval France. So how is it that you won't get diseased? By being wise. Again, the physician that tells people don't eat that, so you won't come into the hand of illness. I am Adonai who warns you in advance. There's the question, the warning in advance. Don't do what will bring you into the hands of disease. So we understand, frankly, all of Torah, all of Jewish tradition to be part of the way that the divine or history or tradition moves us toward non-disease. One small problem, and the questions in the chat box are now bringing it forward. How does it actually work? Because if we confine our definition of healing and illness only to the body, we all have enough lived experience to know that it doesn't work quite like that. Brenda writes that healing may be very different from cure. Exactly right. We cure a disease, we heal a person, we heal a heart. So there's something more going on here. And yet, and we'll get to the everything else more today, but especially in the next 3 sessions, we're laying the groundwork. The impulse to figure out why people get sick and what that has to do with us and what that has to do with God is hard baked into human consciousness. What I'm about to share with you is a teaching from the year 1361. It comes from a guy named Nissim ben Reuven. Anyone happen to have a sense of what was happening relevant to our subject in the year 1361? Perhaps something that might be relevant to this time that we are living through? Not 1961, 1361. Thanks, Michelle. 1361, yes. What's happening in 1361? Plague, Rachel Radansky writes. Black Death, writes Rayanne. A plague, writes Carolyn. Absolutely. This is the Black Death. Black Death is sweeping through Europe. The proportion of people who died during that time was extraordinary. It makes what's happening now, as awful as it is, look like a walk in the park. And so our ancestors hearkened back to, I, Adonai, am your healer. What, you think the Jews were exempt? Not at all. In fact, some of the predominant communities blamed the Jews. Sort of the lie. And so what did Nissim ben Reuven say? I share this with us because we need to know that this is also in our tradition, and this may sound familiar if you listen to the news now. Our ancestors did not see the chastisements of God as we have seen. We've seen them now for 13 years. A total reversal of the natural order of things. Plague has fallen on most inhabitants of the earth, bringing them unusual afflictions impossible to attribute to nature's workings. Anyone enlightened must deem them the finger of God. For illness common to humanity may be attributed to nature. If you get a cold, it's not God's fault, unlike strange ones that must be regarded as God's punishment. As to common ailments, like the common cold, it is said, Yodevavhe will remove from you all illness endemic in our nature, but as to afflictions of Egypt, as we just saw, the word remove isn't there. What God said and says, I will not be placing them on you. Afflictions not arising from human nature don't require removal. Rather, God assures that such afflictions will not be placed on them, will not be placed on us. The implication is that if they do not heed God's words, these afflictions will be visited on them. Such are the afflictions we witness with our own eyes, spreading out and engulfing all until in just this year the world underwent a more radical change than it underwent previously in 200. And now, after all that, will we allow our evil inclination, our deceitful imagination to make claim on us? Will we let them arouse us to rebellion and drive us from our domicile in the inheritance of God? Did our own eyes not see the chastisements of God, and God's strong hand exhorting us not to fall prey to false temporal vanities? Turn back, all you sinners! Should it not thus be easy for us to return to the Holy Blessed One with a whole heart, as our intellect dictates, unimpeded by any hindrance or deterrent, untrammeled by Satan or any evil affliction? Give me a hallelujah. Man, this is uncomfortable. If plague came upon us, it must be that we deserved it. And how many people have been saying, well, if we hadn't been dealing with those animals, if we hadn't been dealing with international relations that way, if we hadn't, and so therefore humanity brought it on ourselves. It was all over the place in the early years, God forbid, early days of the pandemic. And not just that. How many times do we see the reason the hurricane hit South Carolina is the use or misuse of faith, the use or misuse of sacred text? And people start to go, oh yeah. But the thing underneath it is this: the impulse to explain the inexplicable, to try to figure out why, is so embedded in our consciousness that we don't even have to think about it. It motivates the spirit. It twists the psyche. We have to know why. And many people would be more likely to blame ourselves than blame God. Because if we blame God, oh boy, where do we go after that? So many people would much rather blame ourselves than blame God. There's a lot going in the chat box now. One writes, shouldn't we still thank God for good or bad? It's a high spiritual practice to thank God for the bad stuff. The question is, and we'll see it in just a moment, what lemonade can we make out of the lemons? At least that's my personal approach. I'm like you in this. I may be a rabbi, I may wear the beanie on my head, but I've got a body just like you. I wrestle it just like you. So I can offer texts and approaches. I can refract the question with you. I can give you what's written in a book, but I'm less interested in what's in the book than how we actually do it and what's the reality of it. So yeah, we can, but what are we thanking for? And what's that like? Well, here's one thing that comes. One of the kings of Israel, after Saul and David and Solomon, his name was Hezekiah. And back then, there were sovereigns, the king, and the prophet. In this case, the prophet was Isaiah. I'm going to come back to Elaine's comment in the chat box about blaming God. It's a very important one. I want to come back to it. So hang tight there, Elaine. The prophet goes to the king and says, Ko amar Adonai, so saith God, command your house because you will die. And Hezekiah, one of the most beautiful renderings of the spiritual move of illness. Vayasev Chizkiyahu panav el hakir. He turned his face to the wall. Vayasev, it's the same word as sivivon, like a top that you spin on Hanukkah. Vayasev. And he turned his face to the wall. He went inward. He turned. And there he prayed. And the word for prayer is a reflexive verb, the hitpalel. It really means pray yourself. It's like sit yourself down. Sprechen Sie in German. We don't just pray, we pray ourselves. We pray with ourselves, our whole selves. We pour ourselves out, whether it's in praise or yearning or grief. That's real prayer. So Hezekiah, strength of God, ironically, that's his name, turned his face to the wall and prayed and said, please, I've been a good boy. Recall how I walked before you with a full heart and truth. I tried to do my best. And he wept. This great king poured his heart out. How many of us have gotten the test results or have waited for the test results? Or waited for our loved ones' test results, or we're sitting there waiting for the doctor to come out during surgery. We know this story. This is the human story. You don't have to be a king. And Hezekiah weeps, and then the word of God comes to Isaiah. This is the happily ever after moment, right? Go and say to Chizkiyahu, so saith God, Ko amar Adonai, God of David your father. I have heard your prayer. I saw your tears. You were on the throne for 14 years until now. I'm going to add 15 years to your days. Sometimes the answer to a prayer is nothing, and sometimes the answer to a prayer is no. But in this case, it was yes. And our ancestors, over 2,000 years ago, said, why? What's so special about Chizkiyahu? Some of us are putting that in the box and asking questions just about God. What does God have anything to do with this? That's a great question. One person writes, it's nature, it's not God. After God created the world, God moved on and left it for us. There are many people who believe that. Other people believe in an interventional God. Other people believe in a God that hears our prayers and gives us not, the miracle cure, but the strength that feels miraculous, the resilience. Here's exactly where our ancestors went. Genesis Rabbah, the great compendium of Midrash, that's been around for about 2,000 years, imagined that the purpose of Chizkiyahu and God tangling was to bring up something really important. And that's about transforming the heart. Hezekiah says to God in this midrash, this sacred story about Isaiah 38, it isn't good for somebody to be always healthy until they die, because then they'll never think of tshuva. They'll never think of repentance. They'll never think of improving their lives. And in a beautiful spin, which is oh so Jewish, the rabbis put into the mouth of God the following. God says to him, whoa, you're right. It's a good idea. I'll start with you. And sends the prophet to say to Hezekiah, you're done. This is not easy stuff to say. But I'm going to stop the screen share here because now we're talking about a fundamentally different kind of healing. We've made a bit of a sleight of hand from the physical. You're sick, you have this disease, you have whatever happened, and you're going to, because we all will, we've shifted from that to something else, emotional, psychological, spiritual. What is the meaning of our life? Not what is the meaning of our illness. We as humans are meaning-making machines. If you're here, you are proof of it. So either our illness could have no meaning at all, or we can try to give it meaning. Some of the worst meaninglessness, worst of our fears is meaninglessness. And so our ancestors imputed to illness one set of meanings that had to do with whether you deserved it. I don't think most moderns buy that. But more importantly, there's a shift going on. And the shift is, what effect does the illness and healing journey have on the heart and the mind and the soul? That becomes the priority in Jewish life. And we'll see that in future sessions. Where we bless someone traditionally, we don't bless them first for healing of body. We bless them first with healing of spirit. Refuat ha-nefesh, refuat ha-guf. The healing of the spirit, and then the healing of the body. That was the wisdom of the one who offered that sometimes healing does not mean cure. And J.H. writes that it's like hospice, comfort for the soul on the journey. Yes, that one can heal even if one is not cured. And that even if one is cured, one can still not be healed. Because, well, can I see a show of hands of how many people are afraid to get COVID? Okay, good, we're awake. Good, good, good. How many of us have thought about what our lives mean more in the last year than prior years? Uh-huh. Yep, I'm looking around, I'm seeing that. How many of us have experienced being sick and from that experience come out with a new understanding of who we are and what we may want to do with our lives? You are proving the point. You are proving the point right here. And that wisdom that you have is hard-baked into the core understanding of what healing is in Jewish life. Yes, we will also learn about prayers for healing of body and traditions, some of them quite ancient, where we will invoke God, angels, name changes, amulets, all sorts of things to pray, beg for healing of body. The amazing thing about that midrash from Hezekiah is the understanding that it actually wasn't about his illness. It was about his turning to the wall. It was about his hitpalel, his pouring out his heart in prayer. That it's about the relationship that we have between ourselves and God, spirit, meaning, holiness, angels, ancestors, potentiality, great mind, best self, whatever that is for you. It's that relationship that is keyed up in the journey of illness and healing. And that is why people change their lives when they get sick. And that is why people that maybe weren't able to do tshuva or make a reconnection sometimes can do it after being sick or after a scare. We're all limited. We're all time limited. Illness forces us. The specter of illness forces us into that. And that space is sacred, my friends. That space is sacred. That's where relationship and meaning get lifted up. And that's why when I teach these materials, I spend a moment checking in right about now, because this is where the heart starts to either open or feel all the stuff that's in there and choose instead to shut down. One person writes, in our family, we are responding to grave illness by choosing to be insanely grateful. I hear it. That's a choice. That's a turning. In this, yep, someone writes, being in a place of gratitude changes the body to spark wellness. There are many people who believe that a change of attitude can help that along. None of this is to say it's easy. None of this is to say it's magic, and none of this is to blame anybody. But this is the stuff. So when God says, Ani Adonai Rofecha, I am Adonai, your healer, we now have a whole other way to understand that. The literality, the literalism of, if you keep kosher and you give tzedakah, then you won't get kidney stones. Maybe there's another way to understand this. If you follow a life of Torah wisdom, of Jewish wisdom, of being a good person, of menschlichkeit, and you have that orientation, therefore, of looking for blessings, of gratitude, of having a spiritual relationship with self, with other, with community, with God, with tradition, with whatever, then the journey of illness will actually be meaningful, as opposed to the Egyptians. You got plague, that's it. That's it. The end. Pharaoh is God. You've got a God for this, you got a God for this. You got Pharaoh is God on earth. You got sick, that's it. There's no spiritual journey. There's no transformation of self. That God whose first calling card was becomingness. I will be what I am becoming. As for God, so also for us. All of us, B'Tselem Elohim, chips off the old block, made in the divine image. And so illness, while on the one hand so very human, also now becomes a marinade and a way to leap beyond our present state. And I can see some faces saying, you have got to be kidding me. Choose someone else. God sends this to marinate my neshama? Is there somebody else who can teach this series, please? Yeah. What we're doing here, friends, is about getting real. And your questions, your doubts, your wrestles, hopefully in just these first moments, have found some connection with things that our ancestors said 700 years ago, 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago. For all of our scientific prowess, we now know that COVID is a thing and it's a coronavirus and it has little spikes and we've seen them under an electron microscope and we can test. We didn't have that back then. And yet, emotionally, spiritually, psychologically, we're still asking the same questions. There's something extraordinary about that. That we have received as a people these thousands of years of tradition, thousands of years of wrestling with these elementally human things, and not necessarily to find answers, but to be together in the search for the answers, and in turn to find that the journey is not about the physical healing, because loss and suffering are very real, but rather to let ourselves be changed. And this is what we're about here. We will, in our deepest, darkest moments, either turn our backs on God, as some of you have written, or rail at God, as some of you have written, or insist on being so thankful, or modulate between all of them. We'll call those theologies of divine causality. Did God do this? What's our relationship with God? What's the relationship between illness and divinity? Is it right? Does God have anything to do with this at all? Some of you say no. Or is God in the opportunity that illness presents us to find out what's most important about our lives? Hug your people if you can. Send them love. Don't hold back, because we might get sick tomorrow. Some of it might be about what our experience is, not just physically, but also emotionally, mentally, spiritually. The Hebrew words for those, one of them is yir'ah, which is a really great word because it means two different things in English. One of them is fear. A lot of people are afraid to get sick. Yeah. Anybody who looks forward to getting sick, I got another class for you. The other is hakna'ah, which literally means surrender. There is a sense of not fatalism, but a sense that, what can we do? We got sick. And being stuck in bed or stuck in the house or unable to walk or whatever it is, forces us into a posture of both being resilient on the one hand and being real about what's happening on the other. Same with Hezekiah. Some of us ask, what did I do to deserve this? What did he do to deserve this? I don't know if you watch every night on one of the news programs in the United States, at least it's on MSNBC. At one of the evening news hour ends, there's a quick summary, a quick snapshot of a life well lived. And this person lost her life to COVID, and this person lived his life to COVID. And each and every one of them is a father, a mother, a spouse, a brother, a friend, a social worker, someone who donates time, someone who invented this cure, someone who. What did that person do to deserve this? And the answer is, well, there isn't one. Our theology's on the line. And the inexplicability of it brings many people to look at their lives. That was Hezekiah's move. Let me look at my life. Let me turn to the wall. Let me surrender to the fact that I can't control this. Not to be fatalistic, but to say, if I survive this, I'm going back to the gym. If I survive this, I'm not going to be miserly with my love. If I survive this, I'm going to go get that master's degree. If I survive this, boy, howdy, am I going to hug my kids. I'm going to hug them so much, they're going to like push me away. I'm hugging them so much. And if there are things that I need to mop up in my life, boy, howdy, I'm going to do that because I can. That's another aspect of subjective experience. Here's another. How many times have we called out just help? Help her, help him, help. It's called an arrow prayer. There's no liturgy for that. People have been doing this for as long as people have been people. Calling out to God, spirit, meaning, the trees, the doctors, the whomevers. Help, heal. Elna, Rafanallah. We'll look at that. Moses just calls out to God. Elna. God, please, Rafanallah, heal her. When Miriam got Tzara'at. Moses didn't look in a chumash. Moses didn't look in a siddur. Moses didn't ask the rabbi, what's the right bracha? Although there are such things. And we'll look at them. The point of the arrow prayer, the reaching out, is exactly that, the reaching out. And we'll look at that. The reaching out is what Buber talked about when he talked about I vow, that there's a relationship between self and other. Whether we call that God or our highest selves or the universe, doesn't matter. That there's something about the vulnerability about illness, that the very fact that we don't have control, that opens our hearts and opens us to relationship. And some of these comments in the chat box are amazing. I hope you'll look at them too. They're pretty amazing. This is universal, friends. What we're going to learn together during our time is going to be a Jewish take, or a series of Jewish takes, on a universal experience. We all get sick. And there is a universe of spiritual practices. Some of them are going to sound very familiar. Some of them maybe not, at least in Jewish practices. Some of this may not be the Judaism that you were raised on if you were raised Jewish, or the Judaism that you learned and took on. Some of these practices were suppressed, but they still exist, and they exist in Orthodox Siddurim, Orthodox prayer books. And some of us do them whether or not we think they're Jewish. Doesn't matter, we do them and we think they're off to the side of Judaism. But it turns out that they're more Jewish than you may realize. So that's part of what our course will be about. The last bullet on this screen, and then I'm going to open up for some questions, is this word apotheosis. I introduced this word at my shul last week. Has anyone, I'm going to stop the screen actually here. Has anyone ever been in the United States Capitol in Washington, D.C. and looked up at the dome? There's a beautiful rendering, a gorgeous fresco of George Washington looking up and becoming like an angel. It's called the apotheosis of Washington. Apotheosis is becoming godlike. What we do when we wrestle with illness and meaning is we connect with our hearts and our souls, that part of us that is ultimately connected with divinity. That is probably why the journey of illness and healing, sometimes even more than death, is the top thing that helps us make meaning in spiritual life. No one wants it. but it's really powerful. So that's why we're going to make lemons out of lemonade next session. We're going to look at spiritual life in the shadow of illness. We're going to look at how and why sick beds are sacred. We're even going to imagine a God who suffers with us. All of these are Jewish. The next session after that, we're going to be looking at healing liturgies and what we pray for and who we are to do this praying. And then we're going to talk about some mystical practices, angels of healing and amulets and skulot, charms, even name changes, things that people reach for in times of illness and use to make meaning. We're going to do all of this, and I'll do my level best to journey with you with the full diversity of perspectives, over 100 in the room. That's where we're going to go. Along the way, we'll wrestle faith and love and meaning and loss and suffering. What we're doing in real time. We'll connect with tradition. Maybe we'll create some new ones. And my hope is that we'll be able to bring our full hearts together and feel a sense of connection and resilience as we move through these truly unbelievable times. It seems that there are at least one of us who are even joining us from a hospital bed. So I want to honor the call to healing. I see one of us wearing a cannula over the nose. And I am praying for healing of soul and spirit, and healing of body, for the presence of healing itself to fill and surround, and know that all of us are rooting for you as well. We have about 10 minutes, which means we did this exactly right. Julie, I want to invite you to please moderate what I hope will be a wonderful back and forth. I thought you were co-host, Julie. I can try it again. In fact, I'm going to make you host.
Okay, great, amazing. Sorry, I lost my internet. If folks who have questions, you can raise your virtual hand. I might not see your actual hand, though. Let's see. I did see Janet. So, Janet, go ahead.
Hi.
Hi, Janet.
Hi. I guess I put it in the chat a few times, and my burning question is, what you said, I totally really agree with. I guess where I get stuck is with people with mental health issues who can't do that soul searching. I mean, that's part of their whole thing. We're talking about people who really, you know, I can look at it as a physical illness if you look at it as a brain illness. However, there's a definite barrier between them being able to really go through whatever process. Are you going to address this in your course at all, or now, or something?
I would love to. I would love to, because it refracts the fundamental humanity. Because at the end of the day, Janet, and to all of us, whether it's physical illness or mental illness, this isn't a brain thing. We can't really mind our way into a better tomorrow. What we can do, and what chaplains whether in prayer settings or hospital settings are about, is about the immediacy of a couple of things. One of them is comfort, and one of them is seeing each person as a spark of the sacred, even including and especially ones that do not have neurotypicality. It's difficult in a group of over 100 people to spend a lot of time on mental illness, or to be immersed in things that may trigger individual people and a lot of individual stories. So for that reason, Janet, same as I did in the seminary class, I focused on allopathic and physical illness as a fulcrum for the emotional and the psychospiritual. But if there are people that want to send me an email, I have done this before, and I offer to be in contact with anyone who has a follow-up that we don't reach. My email is in the chat box. I will do my level best. Thank you, Janet. I see Allie's hand.
Go ahead, Allie.
Hello, Rabbi.
Hi, Allie.
Wonderful to see you.
It's good to see
Just,
you.
just wonderful. So, I mean, my question, my issues relate to Janet's. I am grieving the loss of a sister who is alive. She is very much alive. And her behaviors are just impossible to understand. We, my other sisters and I, are trying very hard to make sense of what's going on in her life. She has chosen a path that none of us could take, and her decisions are detrimental to our society, and my well-being is questionable with her behavior.
And a couple of people are writing, I relate to that. Physical illness, emotional illness, spiritual illness, mental illness. A lot of people have that, especially at this time when mental health issues are being destigmatized for the good. And the number of Americans, I know most of us are Americans, but not all, but there's an epidemic. There's frankly 2 pandemics going on. What I would ask, Allie, is be in touch with me digitally. Working with individual people on individual issues is very important, maybe not as helpful in a group setting, and I wouldn't want to put you in that position. What I would say is this: whether your loved one is blood relative or chosen family, whether it's physical illness or spiritual illness or mental illness, we are all connected. We are. And it is illness that makes that oh so clear when our loved one is suddenly not there. Not dead, but not there in full strength. When we feel the impulse to go and take care of someone, whether or not we can. When we are afraid for someone else's well-being, when their choices in relation to their care or their behaviors around their experience of illness affect us. We are all connected. Maybe that is why God spoke to us in the plural, not the individual. I will not put on y'all meaninglessness. I will not put on y'all total hopelessness. That through me, capital M, not David, through meaning, through learning, through prayer, through practices, through being together, we can find strength, meaning, marinated hearts. Brenda is writing something really important, that other people's illnesses impact more than just the, quote, patient. Yes, that's true. And there are a number of seminary students here and people who are practitioners in similar fields, and you know that to be true from your own experience. We are all connected. Illness and healing is a sacred, sacred subject, sacred as it is difficult. So I thank you, Allie, for bringing that forward, for giving us that opportunity to make that connection. If you or other people want to be in touch with me directly on a particular subject, please don't hesitate. I'll do my best to be responsive within about 24 hours, Shabbat accepting.
Thank you.
Keep it coming. Thank you, Julie. We've got time for 2 or 3 more, maybe.
Someone writes in the chat box that they have a tumor in the center of their head that can change feelings and behaviors. Who am I? What am I if this is not in my control?
Wow. What an amazing question. The first thing I hope for you is that you are not suffering. And that if you are suffering, that there is both physical care and spiritual, emotional care, that you've got an amazing team around you. Your question is so important, friend, and it's one that I think all of us can empathize with in our own ways. that I feel like I'm on sacred ground here. I don't want to devalue your question by offering an answer. Who are you? Who are any of us if we're not our bodies? Who are we if we are not our emotions? Who are we if we're not the things that we do, if we're not able right now to do? That's a question for the ages. There are times in our lives, and it sounds like you're having one now, that kind of question, which exists for every person alive. Look at our texts, they're thousands of years old. But for you in this moment, that question is like a burning bush. I can't answer it for you. What I can say is that burning bush moments come with tremendous power and potential. If you hold your question in your heart, I don't know what your beliefs are, but if you offer them up, if you speak with a loving other, if you email me or someone else, it might be that this journey of these days and weeks ahead may help reveal the answer for you, or what the answer might be. And in the meantime, we can hold each other in that question. Who are we really if we're not our healthy bodies? That's an amazing gift you just gave all of us, as difficult as the moment is for you. So thank you. Maybe one more, Julie?
I think that is all, unless there's anyone have anything else, or are you going to address chronic illness?
In passing, absolutely. Absolutely. People have already started to do so, about resilience and suffering and longing and power and why. It's just another refraction of these questions. We will be doing all of this along the lines of moving through the curriculum. And again, you are experts in this, not necessarily the Torah texts, but in the humanity of your own experience. So bring it. Bring it as if it were Torah, because I believe it is. And I'll see you this time next week.